Alright, so this is part one video. I'm going to be doing a group vignette week one, and the next video will be the individual. I'll separate them out a little bit. So we'll initially start off with the group vignette case history. So we had a patient with right medial elbow pain. And so with this, there's a couple different things that we have to take into consideration when treating patients. We want to make sure that the table's clean. So we have a spray bottle here with a rag as well. We spray before and after every patient that comes in. We also change the face paper just to make sure there is no spread of germs at all, or so that we can minimize it as best as we can. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the listings that we have going on here, what I would do to find them, how that adjustment would look like, and what you may see afterwards, as well as some exercises for the patient with that condition, and where they may feel it as well. So initially, after we talked about sanitization, the adjustments here, so we have a C6 right rotation restriction, and it's going to be a seated index pillar pole, and so a pole type of mechanism. The patient is going to be seated. The chair has already been sanitized, so you don't have to worry about that. But we have C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, and C6. If it's a right rotation restriction, we're going to line up on this left side here. Before we find that segment, what that segment might look like before we adjust would be if we did an MPI scan, where if my head was on, the forehead of the patient, the spine is not very flexible, so bear with me here. But we basically feel that restriction right at, right there, right at C6. So we line up right there on the left side. And so there's a coupled motion with lateral flexion, rotation, and a little bit of extension that comes into this adjustment, this seated index pillar pull. Patient is seated down at the table. I'm going to demonstrate what that will look like here. And so initially it's going to change from chiropractor to chiropractor a little bit. Everyone has their own style of adjusting. And so this is mine here. So I'm basically going to ask the patient to basically bring this same side ear into this hand where I'm also contacting it. So the ear will fall right in between my thumb and my index finger right there. So I'll basically be having them lay to this hand right here. At the same time, my supporting hand will be not necessarily pushing their head over, but just guiding it as well if they have trouble relaxing, or just, to stabilize their head so it's not moving around quite as much, and we're isolating all of our movement and force with the adjustment into that one segment that we want to adjust. So I'm setting up here. I'm having them laterally flex over my contact. I'm going to have them rotate away from where my contact is, so the occiput is looking the opposite way. My finger is over that way. I didn't mean to flip you off, but right there. So I'm lining up, having the lateral flex over it, rotate away a little bit of extension, and this is how the adjustment will look. So basically I'm setting up here, just like so. And boom, popped up a bunch. A lot of cavitation. Cracked them like a glow stick. So afterwards, let's reassess the area that we just adjusted and see if there's any changes. So we're going to do the same MPI scan. Notice a little bit better range of motion in that same segment that we adjusted. There may also be a slight decrease in the hypertonicity of the muscles in that affected area. And another thing too, maybe before when we were palpating the area, it might have been a little bit tender, a little bit painful. And so after the adjustment, maybe not quite as painful. So that's a good thing. That's what we want. And so that is our first adjustment. Our next adjustment is going to be a right thumb index olecranon push. So this patient has a decreased P to A glide of his right elbow. Okay, so P to A glide is going to be from this going that way. P to A glide. There's going to be a thumb contact. You're going to be contacting the patient's olecranon process. For the assessment, we might notice, it's not going into full extension. The elbow is not quite locking out all the way. Maybe it's stuck just like so. So we contact here, and I'm doing this adjustment on myself just because I only have a spine model. So that's really all I got. But basically, we're setting up here. We have our thumb contacting right on that olecranon process, basically the bony part of the elbow. And our line of drive is going to be like that, like that. And so I'm going to be pushing this arm that way to extend out that elbow, because they have a decreased P to A glide. And this elbow is extended, and so that's just the action that we want to reintroduce. So here's a little bit what it looks like, as best as I can do on myself. But so we get our tissue glide, we get our impression, our force, and we're sinking into that joint till we find lockout, and then we just boom and adjust, just like so. HVLA right into the elbow, P to A glide, and then we reassess afterwards. It's like, oh, I can actually extend my elbow out more. And hey, maybe there's a little bit less hypertonicity in the area, we have better range of motion, might be a little bit less painful in that same affected area, and so forth. Exercises that we would do for this patient as well, in addition to adjusting. I'm going to slide my iPad back a little bit here. And so I'm going to use my table as the surface here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to stretch out the wrist flexors, since those wrist flexors come from that medial epicondyle. That is basically where we need to lengthen, because they've been overworked, and they've been shortened slowly over time and become hypertonic. And so let's stretch them out a little bit. So a good way to do this is to have the patient's palms facing away from the rest of their body. And so we're going to have them put their hands out like so. They can do this on a table, on a desk, or they can do it on all fours. I'm going to do it on a table just for demonstration purposes. And so basically, you're going to put palms face down, and you're going to have the patient, if they're doing it on a desk, maybe ask them to squat more as a progression. And that will put further tension on those anterior forearm flexors. And what they can do even more so is lean back a little bit. Lean the body away from the hands, where the hands are positioned. That will stretch out that anterior compartment even more, and those wrist flexors. As well as pronator teres. We need to stretch that bad boy out as well too. And so pronator teres does the action of pronation. So to stretch out that muscle, we do the opposite. Bring it into supination, like you're holding a bowl of soup. And so what we can do to further stretch that muscle is basically grab that thumb and bring that thumb closer to the pinky, but from this direction. So just pulling it like so. Almost so your hand, the palm, is facing away from the midline of your body. That's a great way to stretch out pronator teres. And something you might notice, decreased hypertonicity of pronator teres, you might have a little bit better range of motion. You might even be able to hold a bowl of soup a little bit better too. But yeah, so that is the exercises for it. And then after the patient gets adjusted and everything, we would clean the table again, and also reassess the areas that we adjusted, ask the patient how they're feeling, and so forth. So tune in for next video.